The velvet of the dress was a comfort against Nia's skin, a deep, royal purple that felt like armor. It was the most expensive thing she owned, a gown that hugged her generous curves with deliberate elegance, its fabric a silent rebuke to the whispers and sideways glances that had followed her down the polished hallways of her own office. She smoothed a hand over her thigh, the material cool and heavy. In the back of the town car, the city lights of Seoul blurred into streaks of neon and gold, a beautiful, indifferent river of light. Nia focused on the rhythm of the windshield wipers, a hypnotic beat against the soft hum of the engine. It was better than focusing on the hollow space that had opened in her stomach. It wasn't nerves. It was humiliation, cold and sharp. She was 20 years old, a junior data analyst with a mind for patterns that had twice saved her division from catastrophic errors. And, tonight, she was a punchline. Mr. Davies and Mr. Thorne, her direct superiors, had made that exquisitely clear. The assignment was framed as a privilege, an opportunity to personally dine with their most important client, Mr. Kwon Jinwoo, a man whose investments kept their entire international branch afloat. A man spoken of in hushed, fearful tones. He's particular, Davies had said, a greasy smile not quite reaching his eyes. He requested someone for dinner. We thought of you, Nia. Show him our firm's commitment. Our diversity. Thorne had simply smirked, his gaze sweeping over her body with an appraisal that made her skin crawl. The joke was obvious. They were sending the fat black girl, the office anomaly, to the notoriously severe, impeccably traditional Korean tycoon. They were waiting for the fallout, the call of complaint, the explosion. They were using her as a human grenade to see what would happen. And she'd had no choice but to agree, to slip into this purple armor and ride toward her own execution. The car slowed, pulling up to a restaurant so discreet it had no name, only a single, carved wooden door set into a wall of dark stone. The driver opened her door, and the city's humid air rushed in. Nia took a breath, held it, and stepped out. The door was opened from within before she could reach it. The interior was a world of hushed quiet and shadow, all dark wood and warm, indirect lighting. Mr. Davies and Mr. Thorne were waiting in the foyer, their cheap suits and eager, predatory smiles looking out of place in the serene elegance of the space. Nia. There you are, Davies chirped, his voice too loud. Right on time. He's waiting. They led her through a maze of corridors to a private room at the very back. The screen doors slid open with a whisper. The room was minimalist, containing only a low table of dark, polished wood and cushions on the tatami floor. A single window looked out onto a meticulously arranged rock garden, bathed in the soft glow of a hidden lantern. And at the table, a man sat alone. He was the stillest person she had ever seen. He wasn't just sitting. He occupied the space with an absolute, unnerving calm. Her first impression wasn't of his face, but of his hands. They rested on the table, one on top of the other, long-fingered and perfectly manicured. They were hands that could sign a billion-dollar deal or snap a man's neck with the same detached grace. He wore a Tom Ford suit, the charcoal wool so exquisitely tailored it seemed a part of him. His hair was black, cut with razor precision. Then he looked up. His eyes were dark, so dark they seemed to absorb the light in the room. They were intelligent, assessing, and utterly devoid of warmth. This was Kwon Jinwoo. Davies cleared his throat, stepping forward with a bow that was too deep, too servile. Mr. Kwon, thank you again for your time. May I present Miss Nia Brooks from our analytics department? We thought she would be an excellent representative of our firm's unique assets. Thorne added his own oily contribution. Our most substantial asset, you might say. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Nia felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she held her chin high, meeting Kwon Jinwoo's gaze directly. She would not let them see her crumble. She gave a slight professional nod. Mr. Kwon, it's an honor. His eyes remained on her unblinking. He didn't react to the jibe. He didn't smile. He didn't scowl. For a long, terrifying moment, he did nothing at all. The silence stretched, becoming a weapon in his hands. Davies and Thorne began to shift, their smug confidence wilting under the pressure of that silent, analytical gaze. Finally, he moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words were quiet, each one a perfectly shaped shard of ice. "Leave," he said, his gaze flicking to Davies and Thorne for the first time. The dismissal was absolute. Davies blinked. "Mr. Kwan, we were just—" "You brought this woman here as an insult," Jin-woo stated. "It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. You assumed my tastes are as crude and obvious as your own. You assumed I would be amused by your pathetic little power play." The color drained from both men's faces. Thorne opened his mouth, then closed it again, a fish gasping for air. Davies looked like he was going to be sick. They bowed again, this time in frantic, genuine terror, and practically scrambled out of the room, sliding the screen door shut behind them. The silence that descended was different now. It was heavier, charged with unspoken things. Nia stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had been the bait in their trap, and the trap had just snapped shut on them instead. Kwon Jin-woo's gaze returned to her. It was still assessing, but the cold fury was gone, replaced by something she couldn't name. He gestured to the cushion opposite him. "You will stay," he said.
It was not a request.
"You have not had your dinner." That was the moment everything changed. The joke was over. But as the door clicked shut, leaving her alone in the silent room with the most dangerous man in Seoul, Nia had the chilling certainty that something far more terrifying had just begun. She sat, her movements careful as she arranged her dress around her. The silence between them was not empty. It was a living thing, a field of tension. He watched her, his expression unreadable. A waitress in a traditional kimono entered soundlessly, placing an array of small, exquisite dishes on the table between them. She never once made eye contact with him. "You are an analyst," he stated, picking up his chopsticks with fluid grace. "A junior analyst, yes," Nia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "And yet they sent you." He selected a piece of grilled eel, his movements economical and precise. "Why?" She met his gaze, deciding that a lie would be an insult to his intelligence. "Because they thought you would be offended. Because I don't look like the other women in my office." They wanted to provoke a reaction. It seems they succeeded. A flicker of something, not amusement, but perhaps a dark satisfaction, crossed his face. They miscalculated the nature of the reaction. He paused, his chopsticks hovering over a dish. "What is your name?" "Nia." He said her name then, a quiet murmur. "Nia." It sounded different in his mouth. Not softer, but clearer. Sharper. As if he were testing the weight of it. "They intended to humiliate you. Instead, they humiliated themselves and lost their most valuable client. A poor business decision." "They're not known for making good ones," she said, surprising herself with her own candor. He ate in silence for a few minutes, and she followed his lead, her appetite slowly returning. The food was incredible, each bite a complex harmony of flavors she'd never experienced. He seemed to notice her genuine appreciation. "You have a discerning palate," he observed. "I just know it tastes good," she said simply. The corner of his mouth tilted, a microscopic shift that was seismic on his stoic face. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. The dinner continued in that vein, a strange and stilted chess match. He asked her about her work, about data patterns and predictive models. His questions were insightful, revealing a mind that was as analytical as her own. He was testing her, she realized, looking for the competence her bosses had tried to erase. And she found herself answering, explaining complex algorithms with a clarity that came from true understanding. He listened, his focus absolute. He made her feel seen in a way that was both unnerving and deeply validating. When the meal was over, he placed his chopsticks down neatly. "My driver will take you back to your hotel." As they stood, he moved to the door, sliding it open for her. It was a simple gesture of courtesy, yet from him, it felt significant. They walked back through the silent corridors, his presence a tangible force field around her. She was aware of his scent, a subtle mix of expensive wool, cedar, and something else, something clean and cold like winter air. Outside, the city air was thick and heavy with the promise of rain. A sleek black Maybach purred at the curb, a driver holding the rear door open. But as Jinwoo stepped out of the restaurant's entrance, the night shattered. A black sedan, lights off, screeched around the corner. The sound of tires tearing against pavement was followed by the unmistakable, terrifying pop-pop-pop of suppressed gunfire. Glass from the restaurant's front window exploded inwards. Nia's training, her life, had not prepared her for this. She froze, her mind a blank slate of shock. But Jinwoo was already moving. He moved like violence was a language he was born speaking. In one fluid motion, he grabbed her, his arm a band of steel around her waist, and threw them both to the ground behind the solid base of a stone lantern. His body covered hers, a heavy, living shield. The world became a storm of noise and sensation. The smell of gunpowder and hot metal, the sharp sting of asphalt against her cheek, the deafening roar of the Maybach's engine as its driver returned fire, and the solid, unyielding weight of Kwon Jinwoo pressing her into the ground. She could feel the hard shape of a gun holstered beneath his jacket, the tense coil of his muscles, the warmth of his breath against her ear as he spoke a single, harsh word.
Stay down.
The exchange was over in seconds. The attacking sedan sped off into the night, leaving behind a ringing silence and the tinkle of falling glass. Jinwoo didn't move for a long moment. He remained over her, his breathing controlled, his head up as he scanned the street. He was a predator, assessing the threat. Then, he pushed himself up, pulling her with him in one smooth, strong motion. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face, her body, with an intensity that felt more clinical than personal. "No," she managed, her voice trembling. "I don't think so." His own men, dressed in the same dark, tailored suits, were suddenly everywhere, materializing from the shadows. One of them spoke to him in rapid, low Korean. Jinwoo's face was a mask of cold fury. He gave a series of clipped commands. He turned back to her. "You cannot go back to your hotel. It is not safe." Before she could process that, he was guiding her to the Maybach. His hand was firm on her lower back, a gesture of control, not comfort. Inside the car, the scent of leather and his cologne was overwhelming. The partitions slid up, encasing them in a bubble of silent, armored luxury. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "To a place you will be secure," he said, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked streets rushing past. "You are a witness. Worse, you were with me. They will assume you are important to me. That makes you a target." They drove to a skyscraper that pierced the clouds in the heart of Gangnam. The private elevator opened directly into a penthouse that was less a home and more a monument to wealth and solitude. It was all glass, chrome, and black leather, with a panoramic view of the glittering city below. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly souling. A perfect cage. "You will stay here," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Nia watched him as he shrugged off his jacket, revealing the perfect white shirt and the leather shoulder holster beneath. She saw it then, a dark stain spreading across the white fabric of his sleeve, just below the shoulder. "You're hurt," she said, her professional instinct kicking in, overriding her fear. In her purse, she always carried a small, meticulously organized first aid kit, a habit from years of being the responsible one. He glanced down, as if noticing it for the first time. "It's a graze." "Let me see." She moved toward him, pulling out the kit. He watched her, a strange look in his eyes, but he didn't stop her as she gently pushed up his sleeve. The bullet had torn a shallow furrow through the flesh. It was bleeding sluggishly. She worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound with an antiseptic wipe, her touch firm and steady. He stood perfectly still, his muscles rigid beneath her fingers. "You are competent," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I try to be prepared." She applied a sterile dressing, her fingers brushing against the warmth of his skin. He was silent for a moment, his gaze distant, fixed on some point in his past. "Her name was Sajin," he said, the words so quiet she almost missed them. She hesitated. The admission was a crack in his perfect, cold facade. A glimpse of the man beneath the monster. He was talking about someone else he had failed to protect, someone whose hesitation had cost them everything. He was revealing a wound far deeper than the one on his arm. He seemed to realize his slip, and the mask slammed back into place. He pulled his sleeve down. He walked to the vast window, looking out at the city that was his empire. "There is a burner phone on the table," he said, his back to her. "It has one number programmed into it. It will connect you to a man who can get you out of the country. A new name, a new life. No one will find you. Or you can stay here." It was a test. An out. A chance to run back to an ordinary world that no longer felt safe or real. She could take the easy way, disappear, and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Or she could stay here, in this glass cage with a man who moved through gunfire as if it were his natural element. She thought of Davies and Thorne, of the casual cruelty that had set this all in motion. She thought of the life she had, the quiet competence no one ever acknowledged. Here, in this world of lethal violence, this man had looked at her and seen her skill. He had called her competent. Nia walked to the table and looked at the burner phone. She didn't pick it up. "They tried to kill you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Your enemies. And my old bosses put me in the room with you. They're connected somehow. I'm an analyst, Mr. Kwan. I see patterns. Let me see the data. I can help you find out who is responsible." He turned slowly from the window, his dark eyes boring into hers. He was searching for something: fear, deception, weakness. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find its opposite. "Staying is a dangerous choice," he warned. "So is leaving," she countered. "At least here, I know what the danger looks like." A long, heavy silence passed between them. He gave a single, sharp nod. The choice was made. She had chosen to stay. And in doing so, she had just stepped out of her life and into his, a world of shadows and blood from which there was no going back. The next few days were a blur of forced intimacy and simmering tension. The penthouse became her world. His men brought her clothes, toiletries, a laptop, everything she needed, all of it impersonal and expensive. She and Jean Woo fell into a strange rhythm. They rarely spoke of anything personal. Their interactions were focused entirely on the problem at hand. He gave her access to his encrypted servers, and she dove into the data, her mind finding a strange solace in the familiar logic of numbers and code. She worked at the massive dining table, while he often stood by the window, taking calls in low, guttural Korean, his voice a weapon she didn't understand but could feel the impact of. He was hunting, and he had given her a leash to help him. She cross-referenced shipping manifests, shell corporations, and financial transfers, building a web of connections. The rival Park syndicate was clearly involved, but the initial vector, the source of the leak about his dinner reservation, was still missing. One evening, he came to stand behind her, watching the screen over her shoulder. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that cedar scent again. Her fingers momentarily froze on the keyboard. "Anything?" he asked, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "The Parks are moving money through a series of new import-export businesses," she said, forcing herself to focus. "The transactions are small, designed to fly under the radar. But the frequency, it's a classic structuring pattern. They're preparing for something big. A territory grab. They need inside help for that," he mused. "Someone to tell them where and when I am weakest. Someone like the person who told them you'd be at that restaurant," she finished for him. She hesitated, then made a decision. It was time to cross a line. "I still have my credentials for my old company's network. They're internal servers. If someone there was paid off, the transaction might be hidden in an expense report. A bonus, a commission? That would be illegal," he stated, his voice flat. She turned to look at him, her chair swiveling slightly. "Mr. Kwan, I am currently an accessory after the fact to at least 3 felonies, and am living in the home of a man who is just in a shootout. I think we're a little past worrying about illegal network access." For the second time since she'd met him, the corner of his mouth twitched. He gave a curt nod. Do it. She spent the next hour hacking into her old firm system, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline.
She was good at her job.
She moved through their firewalls like a ghost. And then she found it. A flagged expense report from 2 weeks ago. A 5-figure consulting fee paid to a numbered company. A company she recognized from the park's network. The fee was authorized by one person, Mr. Thorne. It was Thorne, she said, the words tasting like ash. He sold you out. Jean Woo's expression didn't change, but a new, chilling stillness settled over him. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. I see. Before he could say another word, the world exploded for the second time. The reinforced glass of the penthouse window spiderwebbed, a silenced bullet creating a starburst pattern at its center. Then another. And another. They weren't trying to shoot through. They were weakening the integrity. Get down. Jean Woo's command was a roar this time. He threw the heavy dining table on its side, creating a makeshift barrier, and dragged her behind it just as a team of black-clad figures rappelled down the side of the building, smashing through the weakened glass. The fight was brutal and fast. It was not the choreographed violence of movies. It was desperate and ugly. Jean Woo moved with a lethal economy, a knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. He dispatched the first 2 men before they could even get their footing. But there were 4 of them. One of them broke past Jean Woo's defense, coming straight for her. He was large, his face obscured by a balaclava, a gun in his hand. Nia scrambled backward, her back hitting the overturned table. There was nowhere to go. She saw Jean Woo turn, saw his eyes widen as he realized her immediate danger. He threw himself in the path of the attacker, but the 4th man intercepted him, driving a blade into his side. Jean Woo grunted in pain, a sound that ripped through Nia, but he didn't stop. He finished his opponent, but he was slower now, blood staining his dark shirt. The man who had been coming for her was almost upon her. His eyes, cold and merciless, were all she could see. Panic gave way to pure, primal instinct. Her eyes darted around, landing on a heavy, modern art sculpture on a pedestal nearby, a twisted piece of solid bronze. With a surge of adrenaline, she lunged for it, hefting it with both hands. It was heavier than she expected, but terror was a powerful fuel. She swung it with all her might, connecting with the side of the man's head. He crumpled to the floor without a sound. She dropped the sculpture, her hands shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Jean Woo was leaning against the wall, one hand pressed to his side, his face pale. The fight was over. His remaining men were already storming the room, securing the perimeter. The news reports called her a person of interest now. A grainy security photo of her entering the restaurant splashed across every screen. The parks had made her a public target. She was no longer just a witness. In the eyes of the underworld, she was his woman, his weakness. Later, after his personal doctor had come and gone, stitching the deep knife wound in his side, she sat by his bed. He had refused anesthetic, enduring the procedure with nothing more than a tightened jaw. Now, in the quiet of the room, the tension between them was a palpable thing. He reached out, his hand surprisingly strong, and gripped her wrist. His touch was hot against her skin. "They think you are my weakness," he said, his voice rough with pain. Nia looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his pale skin and her own deep brown. "Are they wrong?" His grip tightened. "They are wrong," he repeated, his dark eyes intense. "You are a liability I have chosen to keep." It was the most honest, brutal, and intimate thing anyone had ever said to her. It was not a declaration of love. It was a confession of something far more dangerous. "I chose to stay," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "That makes me your problem to solve, Mr. Kwan. Not your liability to carry." He held her gaze, and in that moment, she knew she had crossed a final line. She was no longer a civilian caught in the crossfire. She was a part of his war. The final confrontation was inevitable. Thorne, now in the wind and protected by the park syndicate, arranged a meeting. a supposed handover of territory in exchange for his continued safety. It was a blatant trap, designed to lure Jin-woo into an ambush. He sent the location, Jin-woo said, showing her the encrypted message on a tablet. A warehouse on the Incheon docks. Nia studied the details, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. It's too obvious, she said, shaking her head. Thorn is arrogant, but he's not stupid. He knows you'll expect a trap. She closed her eyes, picturing the man, his habits, his pathetic need to feel smarter than everyone else. When we had to set up off-site meetings for sensitive clients, Thorn always had a decoy, a public location to leak, while the real meeting happened somewhere private. Somewhere he controlled, she thought back, pulling at the threads of memory. He owned a small logistics company on the side, a vanity project. It was based out of a customs warehouse near Gimpo Airport. She pulled up a map, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She cross-referenced property records. Her suspicions solidified into certainty.
Here.
This is where he'll be. Jin-woo looked from the map to her face. He saw the conviction in her eyes. My men have already been dispatched to the Incheon location. Call them back, she urged. Send a skeleton crew to Incheon to make it look good. The real fight will be at Gimpo. He studied her for a long, silent moment. He was weighing the lives of his men against her intuition. Against her. He gave a single, sharp nod and picked up his phone. He was betting his empire on her. The Gimpo warehouse was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. Jin-woo moved ahead with his elite guard, a silent, deadly phalanx. He left 2 men with her, their instructions clear: keep her safe at all costs. But Nia knew safety was no longer an option. The night erupted into controlled chaos. The sounds of gunfire, sharp and contained within the metal walls of the warehouse, reached her. She waited in the car, every muscle tense. Then, one of her guards' radios crackled. It was Jin-woo's voice, strained. They have Thorn, and they're falling back to the East Wing. They're trying to box us in. Nia knew she couldn't just sit there. She was the one who had seen Thorn's patterns. She had to be the one to see the end of it. She got out of the car, ignoring the protests of her guards. Where's the East Wing? They pointed, and she ran, her heart pounding. She found an external door, pried it open, and slipped inside. The scene was a tableau of violence. Jin-woo and his men were pinned down behind some shipping crates. Across the cavernous space, the remaining park enforcers were using a terrified Thorn as a human shield. Thorn saw her. A sick, triumphant grin spread across his face.
Nia.
I knew my favorite asset wouldn't miss the party. Tell your new boss to stand down, or I'll start shooting pieces off your old one. Jin-woo's head whipped around. His eyes found hers, and for a fleeting second, she saw raw fear in them. Fear for her. That was when her mind went cold and clear.
She saw the chessboard.
Thorn was a coward. He was using himself as a shield because he was afraid of Jin-woo. He wouldn't shoot. But she couldn't let this stalemate continue. She remembered the burner phone Jin-woo had given her. It was still in her pocket. On the drive over, she had done something on a hunch, linking the phone's emergency broadcast signal to the warehouse's public schematics. A long shot. She pulled out the phone. As Thorn postured, she activated the signal. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening hiss, the fire suppression system engaged. Halon gas, thick and white, began pouring from the ceiling, a chemical fog that swallowed the light and choked the air. Chaos. Everyone was blinded. Men were coughing, disoriented. Thorn shoved his human shield away, trying to make a break for it. In the swirling mist, he ran right past her. Nia didn't hesitate. She still had the expensive, heavy pen from her first day at the penthouse. She drove it hard into his thigh. He screamed, a high, thin sound of shock and pain, and collapsed. The single action broke the stalemate. Jin-woo's men moved through the gas like wraiths, their targets now disoriented and exposed. The fight was over in moments. When the emergency vents cleared the air, Nia was standing over the whimpering form of Mr. Thorn. Jin-woo approached her, his suit torn, a cut bleeding freely on his cheek. He ignored everyone else, his eyes locked on her. He stopped a few feet away, the space between them humming with everything that had happened. He looked at the pen still clutched in her hand, then back at her face. A slow, profound understanding dawned in his eyes. "You were never the joke, Nia," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent warehouse. He said her name, and it was a claim. You were the weapon they did not see. Weeks later, the city was quiet. The park syndicate was broken, its lieutenants either dead or in Jinwoo's debt. Thorne and Davies had simply disappeared. Nia's old life was a ghost, a story that had happened to someone else. She stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the night air cool against her skin. The view of Seoul was no longer that of a cage, but of a kingdom. His kingdom, and in a strange way, hers. She had paid for her place here. Her anonymity, her past, her innocence, all of it had been burned away in the fire of the last few weeks. She heard him approach, his footsteps silent on the stone. He didn't speak, just came to stand beside her, following her gaze out over the river of lights. After a long moment, he placed something on the small table beside her. A single, heavy key, ornate and old-fashioned. It was the master key to the penthouse, to the building, to the life it contained. It was not a proposal. It was not a promise. It was an acknowledgement of a truth that already existed. This was her place now if she chose to accept it. The choice had been made long ago, in a quiet restaurant when she had refused to be a punchline. It had been made in a penthouse when she'd refused to run. It had been made in a warehouse when she'd refused to be a victim. Nia didn't look at the key. She looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the balcony, at the hard lines of his face, the unyielding set of his shoulders. Then, slowly, she turned to face him, to face the man and the world he represented. She didn't have to pick up the key. She was already home.